in Baptist, you know, we weren't supposed to go dancing. Now, Mother and Daddy went out to the Evanses dances at their house, but that was controversial.
Did they not tell people about it?
Probably not, but, you know, small town, everybody
Small
knows.
town, everybody knows you.
Yeah.
And my sister was engaged to the Evans' son, and so, you know, we went to their dances. And then Sister Eden's, she was one that sang. We had a quartet or a quintet actually that sang, and then one of the girls' parents, they'd have dances in her home, and occasionally we'd go to that. And so we
You were a
did that.
majorette?
Yeah, and I was okay. I was drum majorette or in
Twirler.
high school twirler, and I twirled in junior high at Garden City, but I never got to go to a football game. I'd go practice and work out, but I was too embarrassed to ask my parents to get me there. And my mother didn't drive at night by herself, and Daddy worked shift work. So I would go work out, and if I got to go to a football game, if it was in town, then I'd twirl. And then, of course, Talbot, I went to the football games and was twirler. And my last year was head majorette, and then I got football sweetheart my senior year.
And he played football?
Joe played football. You didn't play basketball, did you? I played
I think
basketball and
so.
volleyball and tennis.
Basketball.
Yeah.
What was it? 6-man football?
And we had 6 men. They're all we had on the team.
Offense and
And
defense.
Joe, if you look out on Ancestry.com, there's and go through the newspaper clippings for Joe Allcorn, you would find I've got probably 40-something details of when he became president of the bank in Ballinger, where he was in 4-H and he won his lamb or his cow or whatever would win prizes, and there's newspaper clippings out there on that. You search for them.
I like that.
Yeah.
You was talking about songs.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry to tell you about, we sang at the high school. And we sung Don't Let Your Stars Get...
Yeah, Cheeky lost one of his good friends in high school, in his class. They'd play the guitar and sometimes entertain in the study hall. And so one of the times I remember Joe was, and Chinky singing, Don't Let the Stars Get in Your Eyes, Don't Let the Moon Break Your Heart. He was in that. And so Chinky
My
died.
singing career kind of got nipped in the bud. When I was in 3rd or 4th grade, we was having a program. And I was supposed to sing Pistol Packin' Mama. And my mama wouldn't let me sing it. And she nipped the bud. They didn't even have it. She thought that was too bad. They were singing, drinking beer in a cabaret.
But we moved to Ballinger and put in the White Ox store, and we had that for 5 years. I worked on the side for Odell Howard, independent oil operator. And then Joe went to work for the funeral home, didn't you?
Mm-hmm.
And he did lease land on the side and did that type of thing. And he'd go to even Santa Ana and do involvement
Well, I
there.
did
didn't
Santa
he?
Ana and
And then help take care of the ranch. So he
Eden
stayed busy all the
and
time.
Bront and Robert Lee. I did all those funeral homes, small funeral homes.
And then he asked for a raise one time because Jeffrey was born and he needed more money.
Mm-hmm.
What did he offer you? $10
$10 a month.
a month, and that humiliated him. So he decided he needed to
I
look for
told
another
him, I
job.
said, I consider that an insult.
Mm-hmm.
He said, why did you say that? I said, if you told me you couldn't give me a raise, I could accept that. But I says, $10, I had picked up some ambulance work and was billing Medicare, and I was bringing in maybe $100 a month there.
Mm-hmm.
But he couldn't see that, you know.
So Jim Copeland at the Farmers and Merchants State Bank had one time suggested, Joe, why don't you think about coming to work for us at the bank? So that's when it made up his mind that he'd do that. So you borrowed their big book and read through it, and he went to work for the Farmers and Merchants State Bank. And you started off as, you ended up as cashier, didn't you? And then vice president.
Well, I started off, and I worked 2 weeks in the bank, and they called me in and said, do you think you can handle the operations into the bank? Well, I tried it once, and I said, sure. Well, I went to work there, and Ross Murchison retired 2 weeks. The next week, the bank examiners hit. And I bet they thought that was the dumbest cashier that they ever had.
But he started in the bookkeeping department, and he did a little bit, just did a little bit of everything until he worked up, and then they made him.
And then,
vice
Mr. Summers died, and they moved Jim to his position and moved me up where Jim was.
Okay.
And they hired another guy come in, James Rose. And
So, were you still working the farm during that
yeah,
as well? When did you do that? On the
after
weekend?
the bank closed.
Okay. So
I
at
worked
night?
the bank till 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Then I'd run home, change clothes, go to the farm, plow till 10, 11 o'clock at night, come home.
But they were a lot of good times out at the farm. He'd take the boys and they'd roast wingies. And
Yeah.
Did you go too a lot of times?
sometimes, yeah, when I
Yeah.
could on the weekends.
We'd sometimes go out on weekend and
Yeah. And then we'd do things with the cattle, and Joe would move. Joe's brother would come out far with his family and his boys. He had 2 boys and a girl. And the kids would play and around the barns and things like that.
So it was fun.
They'd fish, and I don't think you did much fishing, but they did.
yeah,
And when did the boys start to do work on the farm?
when it got big enough to walk.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I guess Joe worked out at the farm till after Jeffrey died.
Yeah,
Yeah, Jeffrey was born, and so I had different jobs in Ballinger. I worked for the doctor's office, and I worked for the Chamber of Commerce office, and then I started driving back and forth to San Angelo and worked for GTE. Did that for about 3 years, but Jeffrey came along, and he was, let's see, Richard was about 9 when he was born, and then that would make Mike about 8, and Steve was not quite in school. And so when he was 11, he had a cerebral hemorrhage, and he and Joe were going out to the farm to work. And, well, actually, we had gone to a party on Saturday night before that, and it was down the street, and he was going to stay home. But he wanted to go because his girlfriend, Dawn, it was at her house. But I said, Dawn ain't going to be there. So he cried, and I said, well, we just won't go. No, he was humiliated. Yes, you're going to go. So, but he had broken his arm the week before that, something like that. And then that Saturday morning, or Friday morning, whatever it was, Saturday morning, I guess. Anyway, his friend had come over, and they'd gone to Horror Hills, ridden their mini bike and all that. But when they got back, they looked guilty. I don't know if they were just most tired, but they just had that look, something's up, but they don't want you to know. Anyway, so his friend went home, and I had Jeffrey lie down. He said, oh, I don't want to take a nap. And I said, well, then lie down and watch TV, because I knew you'd go to sleep. He was 11. So anyway, that night we went to the party. And then that Sunday morning, he didn't feel well. And he said, oh, I just really don't feel good. And I said, well, then you stay here, and we'll go to Sunday school, and then we'll come back and have lunch. And every Sunday afternoon, Joe and Jeffrey, the other boys, were older, either gone. Richard was in the Air Force. Mike was in San Angelo, and Stephen was still in high school. And Jeffrey would go out to the farm with Joe, and they'd work. And he'd play and ride his mini bike and do different stuff. And so, anyway, when we got home from church, well, Joe started preparing lunch, and I went back to check on him, and he said, oh, I'm going to go to the farm. And I said, well, I got to see how you look. And let me look at your eyes. And he got up and said, oh, I feel fine. I said, you may feel fine, but your eyes don't look right. But I'm going to the farm with Daddy. Well, you don't keep somebody home just because they don't look right. So anyway, we had lunch, and I laid down to take a nap, and he went to the farm with his steady. And that's where he had his hemorrhage. And he had a really bad headache. And so Joe turned around and brought him to the emergency room. And my next call was a knock on the door. I'd take the phone off the hook so I could take a nap, because I had to drive back and forth. And Mark Nunn from across the street said, Miss Allcorn, Joe's called and he wants you to come to the emergency room at the hospital. So I went, and Jeffrey saw him in the emergency room on the table. He was still not responding to anything. And I said, could he have had a heart attack? Because earlier they had gone to see a movie, and Richard had called and said Jeffrey's chest was hurting. So he took him to the emergency room, and they said, oh, well, he's just got excited. I think they gave him a little pill or something. And so I remembered that, and I wondered if he could have heart problems. So anyway, I said, could he have had a heart attack? And the doctor said at this point he could have had anything. So they called the ambulance and had them take him to San Angelo, and we followed him. And he lived a week after that. They didn't give us any hope for him. Said most people that had a cerebral hemorrhage didn't live long enough to get to the emergency room, let alone get out. So, but they did, they elected, and we had the choice of doing surgery, and maybe there was a clot and they could remove that. But he said, I don't know what we'll do if he even gets out of the hospital to keep him from having another, because he will have another one. Mm-hmm. They never did give us any hope, but we elected to do that, and he lived a week. Anyway, after that time,
So
Joe didn't have the heart to work at the farm anymore.
okay.
So that's kind of quit. That curtailed his farm life, working at the farm. And then when we
Curtailed Papa Joe's farm,
Mm-hmm.
Papa Joe from going out. He didn't want to. Okay.
He didn't want to go out there anymore.
So what? Just question. So he was having headaches, and it was a.
No, he wasn't having headaches. He had a headache going out the farm that day.
So it was bad
Sharp.
enough that you thought he should go to the hospital.
No, he said.
No, he went. We was going to the farm, and he was complaining of headache. And I asked him. I said, "Well, do you want to go on down to the farmhouse and lay down, or do you want to go back to town?" And he said, "Let's go back to town." Well, I knew, you know, if a kid said that, he didn't feel good. So I turned around and started back there. And, of course, the highway patrol picked me up before I got to Ballinger. And,
But you turned around, and well, first he said he had a headache, and you kind of slowed down. But this is what you told me. And then he went a little further, and then he said, "Oh, Daddy, my head hurts so bad." And so that's when Joe turned around and started back. He doesn't remember this, but I remember him telling me that Jeffrey needed to throw up, so he stopped the pickup, and he upchucked, and he stopped and held him so he wouldn't choke on his upchuck. And then he doesn't remember that part, so I guess it was too painful. Mm-hmm. And so then he started back to the Ballinger Hospital, and the highway patrol got us. They got you before you got to Ballinger, didn't they?
yeah, I ran out of Talpa, and of course, I was going over the speed limit, you know, and the patrolman turned his lights on and turned around and was going to stop me. And I motioned him up beside the pickup and pointed to Jeffrey in there. And so he just followed me, you know, and he took me on into the Ballinger Hospital. Mm-hmm. Of course, I think I could have made it just as fast. But anyway, he got the right away there.
Okay. So okay, the week after that he was in the hospital, was he coherent? I mean, could he talk to you?
Was it? No.
No.
He
lost consciousness before we got to the hospital.
Yeah,
Okay.
he never did speak to us again. We think he could hear, and before he died, we think there was some recollection. They told us that be careful what you say, because they even though they can't talk, they may understand what you say. So we tried not to be emotional, and we just talked to him. And of course, I know Dad went in to see him one time, and he had that cast. His arm was in a cast from his right before. And Joe's daddy said, "Well, I haven't signed your cast yet." And he raised his arm, and we don't know if he really consciously did it, but Daddy did sign his cast. And I know he must have had some feeling, because they'd swab out his mouth with a lemon stick and he'd make a face, or they'd pinch on his shoulder and he'd move. And they had him, his temperature got up to 106. They had him packed on ice. And it was cold, so he fought that ice continuously. So he had some feeling. We don't know if he's conscious of that or not.
Okay.
But, and I know one time I was talking to him about his friend Corey, and said something to him about what Corey said, da 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 da, and there was a tear in his eye. So we don't know what he went through.
Okay.
But then on Friday night, they said, well, he's going. They didn't think he would live. But then they let us go in the room and stay with him overnight. Well, then he rallied the next morning. The doctor said, well, he's rallied. So we don't know. And so one of the nurses knew, though, she would not work that night. We heard them arguing. And they had lost another child on her when she was working. And she couldn't bear to go through because she knew he wasn't going to live. We didn't know that. She knew it.
Who was she, do you remember?
But Saturday morning, we went in to see him, though. And I asked the nurse, I said, well, Joe thinks he's better. I don't. I said, he's still. It's like he's still. And she said, he sees what he wants to see. You're his mother, you know what you see. And then he died. We had a lot of friends to support us.
How did the boys react? Was Richard, he was gone, and Mike was...
And before Jeffrey had this episode, Richard had come home for something. He was in the Air Force, and he was, I don't know if he was still in the force or in civil service at that point. But
he was in
Austin.
Berkshire, yeah.
Oh, okay.
And so, anyway, he'd come home and visited, and he left, and when he left to go back, Jeffrey just came berserk. And so then a little bit, Richard came back, and he forgot something. And I said, I'm so glad you came back. Jeffrey's just beside him, said, you gotta go talk to him. He went and talked to him. For years, he didn't tell us what he said. But then when we were in Oklahoma, and I had a little spell, and Richard was home from the Air Force, and they were trying to get me to go to the hospital, and I didn't want to go. And he said, please. And then he told me what Jeffrey had said. He said, Jeffrey said, I don't think I'll ever see you again. He didn't want him to leave, and he cried, and he didn't. He saw him, but he wasn't able to communicate. So somehow or another he knew that he wasn't going to live very long. His head didn't know, but his heart knew.
Sure.
Well, when I can't remember if it's Sunday evening or when. Of course, Mike was in, I guess, in Angelo State. And Steve was still in high school. And they were at home, but they were out somewhere.
Okay.
But anyway, I called Richard and talked to his commanding officer, told him what had happened. And
there's a lot of things that happen that you don't know the other end of it.
He
I know you did that.
sent another boy with Richard to go back, to go home, you know. And then we paid for this boy's airplane back to Austin. And,
My sister came from California, and she was there.
Okay. And where was my dad?
Your dad?
He was there?
he was at home.
Okay.
I'm sure he was probably at the hospital, but through a time like that, you don't.
They were
Sure.
Sunday afternoon, you know, and anyway, we found the boys.
I know Stephen had a girlfriend at that time, and Jeffrey didn't ever like her because he didn't think she treated Steve right. We said, well, Joe said, well, he doesn't always treat her right. Yeah, but he's my brother. And so she wanted to go in and see him, and I don't think that they would let her because she wasn't family.
Okay.
Even though she was a girlfriend, they would let her do it. They let family only go in.
So how did they immediately after? How did they act? I mean, did everyone did Richard go back to Austin and Mike?
He went back to Austin. I don't remember when, but anyway, a few days later he went back.
Yeah, we had to resolve and return to life.
Yeah.
I don't know. A lot of it's cloudy.
Sure.
You're so grieved. I didn't think I'd ever smile again. I didn't think I'd ever be happy again. I didn't want to be. And I couldn't understand why I couldn't just go to. Even though I had children, I didn't think they needed me. But I've learned since then they always need you. Even when they have children. So as long as you live, you're needed somewhere. And if it's not anything but prayers. And I can remember Miss Allcorn died in 76. And a lady telling me, well, they're going to miss her because she prayed for those kids. And I kind of followed it in the back of my brain, you know, I didn't think a lot about it. Then my mother died on Mother's Day, 11 months before Jeffrey died. Well, she prayed for us too. And then after Jeffrey died, and then we had about 7 or 8 wrecks among the boys and us in the next year. And then I remembered what that woman had said. And I said, my word to mothers and daddies, pray for your children. Don't ever stop praying for your children because they need your prayers. And I realized that we didn't have those prayers anymore. And look what happened. You know, not that it wouldn't have happened anyway, but it does make a difference. Anyway, you know, I thought I would never be happy again. Joe and I had a hard time communicating, being compassionate with each other. He just said, sometimes I hate the whole world, I can't help it. And I'm sure it was terrible for the boys. Well, Richard was gone, Mike was over here in San Angelo, Stephen was at home, and I'm sure that next year was like hell to him. We weren't good parents. And, but then eventually there came a time that you could smile again, and you wanted to, and you didn't, and then there time you did. And so life goes on. It takes a long time.
Sure. Do you think after that, you know, you said that year or a few years, that it ultimately strengthened your relationship with each other, where you could lean into each other more, and or
No,
not?
not really.
Okay.
It took a long time.
Sure.
A long time. I don't know if we were. I think we've come together better. What? The last few years. We've had many ups and downs.
Sure.
But that's life.
How many years have you been married?
50, going on 58.
Wow.
Going on 58.
That's a long time.
That is a long time to know anybody that well, too. Man. Okay, so after, so Dad was still at home, Jeffrey passed, then did Dad go to Sweetwater right after he graduated high school?
Well, he finished high school, let's see, Jeffrey died in, 79, and Steve
Graduated in 80, I guess.
80, I guess, because Mike was already out, and Steve was at home probably another year,
Okay.
and then he graduated,
Okay.
and that's right at about a year.
Okay.
And then when he graduated, he didn't want to go to college, he wanted to go to flight school. And so we went to Sweetwater.
And Joe was offered a job as vice president of the bank at Hobbs. And so we felt like really we needed a move.
Okay.
Every time, everybody we saw in Ballinger, that's what they thought of, was Jeffrey. And that's what, we knew what they were thinking. And we just needed new opportunity, we needed change. And he was kind of stifled in his job there in Ballinger. So we went to Hobbs and lived there 8 months. And then he was offered a job in Idabel, Oklahoma, as, I don't know what your position was, vice president? And then you became
Executive
president.
vice president that would run the bank because they had already removed Don from management.
Yeah.
But we left him in as president because, you know.
And we lived there about 3.5 years.
How much?
3.5
Yeah.
years. And then we went to Miami, and we were there a couple of years, or a year and a half.
Okay.
No, 2 years.
2 years. And then we came back. Everybody was having a hard time in Oklahoma and in Texas, so we decided to come back. And he had mono there, and so he was not as strong as he used to be.
Mm-hmm.
And we decided to come home. And like, if we wanted to be with family, he couldn't travel. Kids didn't have the money to come because they were young, married or not married or whatever. So we decided to come back to Texas, and we moved to StoryPart in the northwest Austin. And he was consultant for Copeland Bank.
In Copeland.
I moved one day, and the next day I had met this guy from the bank, and he was taking over the bank at Copeland. And he knew loans, but he knew nothing about bank operation or anything like that. And what he wanted me to do was set up the operation, and the bank had a lot of problems in it. And so he offered me a job there, and I went to work.
Yeah, and you worked there, and then you went to work for the
Wahlberg Bank.
Where was that?
That's right, out of other side of Georgetown. And he didn't really, they offered him a job, but he didn't want a permanent job as president or whatever.
And they were open Saturday morning.
Yeah, he's
And
tired of working Saturdays.
it just ruined the weekend because they opened till noon Saturday. By the time I got the bank closed and got home, it was 2 o'clock. Well, Saturday's gone by then. And I just...
So
and
then
I
you
felt
went-
like, too, I wanted something a little more oomph to it.
Sure.
And you went to work for Frontier? What was the bank
Yeah,
called?
Frontier.
Frontier, and then of course they were merged. or
Merged
whatever.
so long both the
And
bank.
then he went to work downtown, first day for Joe Long.
Downtown Austin?
Yeah.
And drove back and forth. How long did you do that?
Well, let's see. Probably a couple of years.
That drove from Cedar Park to Austin?
Well, we had moved
we
to
lived
Round Rock
in. We had bought
in '89.
this house in Round Rock, one we lived in
Okay.
for 25 years,
Yeah.
and
And so he drove back and forth, and then his son Steve wanted to buy a franchise in Flower Mound. So
not Steve. I thought you said okay.
his son
I thought you
Steve,
said Richard.
no. And so he wanted his daddy to go with him to talk to him, and they did their preliminary work and everything, and so he went with him. And he called home, and I said, well, did you get the franchise that Steve wanted? He said, well, we bought 2. And I said, well, are we going to quit and go to Dallas and help him, or what? He said, no, I bought one in Round Rock, Texas. Well, I was in shock, because even though he'd had his real estate license and broker's license for years, and used him at the bank, would never run a real estate office, never worked for Remax, period. And so I couldn't imagine how he was going to do this. Well, he thought he was going to hire somebody to run it. And well, you have 6 months to open your office. You got to do something. So he decided he was tired of being a number and he was going to run it himself. So we opened it out of the home, and I was working for Texas Guaranteed Student Loan and continued to work for them. But anyway, so he opened his office in April of '93. Yeah, April of '93, and then of course we had that for him. And then I left after he had a heart attack in '96. I left Texas Guaranteed Student Loan. I'd gotten my license a couple of years before that, and continued to work for TGSLC. And so he needed help. He was not strong, and he needed help. So I quit my job and went to work for him at the office.
Okay.
And we had that office for, what, 11 years?
Mm-hmm.
And then we sold it, and then worked out of our home for a while as realty. What was it? Allcorn Realty.
Okay.
And then Joe had 3 strokes, and we decided it was time to sell our house and to move where he had less to do, less outgoing. There was no more incoming. So we found out about this Rio Concho West, and we moved out here. It's the best thing we did. He had 4 more strokes after we moved here, and then he's had another one since then. So he's had 8 strokes total.
The last one, they wouldn't have found it if they hadn't have done the test.
No, we did not know it.
And,
Usually we were aware of it, but they did an MRI and said he had a stroke on each side of his brain. We weren't even aware of that.
Oh wow.
And usually there was some telltale sign, you know.
Mhm.
But anyway, this is the best place for us to be at this time of our life. We love it here.
Good place.
Yeah. We have family, and they used to some of you lived around here. And I think it's kind of home. It's like home.
Oh, yeah.
We're close to the hospital. We liked Ballinger, but it was too far. I didn't want to be on the road that far.
Yeah.
and I think, as much as we have to go to the doctor, I would hate to have to drive 35 miles
Yes.
over here and 35 back,
It's too far.
and
It's
then
about 40.
groceries and
Mm-hmm.
Well, and our neighbor, the house would have become available that we lived in those 16 years in Ballinger.
Mm-hmm.
That was going to come up for sale, but when my neighbor said, next door to the neighbor that we lived at, and across the nuns that we lived in front of, that she said, well, Shirley, we're going to San Angelo like 3 times a week. And I thought, 3 times a week? An hour over there, an hour back?
Mm-hmm.
I did that for 3 years. We don't want to do that. We need to be close to a hospital. We don't have to be on the road all the time. That's one thing we want to do is get out of the car, get out of the traffic. And so we decided that this was the best place for us. Happy to be here.
Good place. What okay, so
And you can't tell 58 years of life in a few hours.
no, you can't capture it.
and we will both agree that the happiest time of our lives was when our children were home.
Really?
yeah.
We would not take for those years. They were precious to us. We loved our children. We still love our children. We love their children. And we prayed for them still. And we pray for the children that they have and the children they're going to have. And there's nothing like a family. You'll have one day. And you'll know what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah.
You lose your selfishness, more or less, when you have a child. You realize it's not all about you. You're not so self-absorbed. And it's the nearest explanation, not like God is, but to God and Jesus Christ and what He did for us, to anything I could give is having a child.
Sure. Last question. What, of all the decades, you know, the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, the 10s again, what do you think was the if you could go back to one of those and live in it again, which one would you choose? Aside from, you said the happiest time of your life is when all the kids lived at home. Say you had to remove that from the equation.
The children?
Yeah, and just the world in general.
Well, I think today I
Okay.
would say today,
Really?
because we don't get to see the kids as much as we like to. I can't travel, and it's but we have friends out here, and of course they're like the guy next door. You know, he was a friend, but you know, we know nothing about him and anything, you know, and
And what was the question? I'm not sure we understand the question.
Yeah, I phrased it bad. Well, okay, how about this? Which generation that you grew up in?
Would you relive
Yeah, did you think was?
outside of when the children were home? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
Is that what you're
he
saying?
said
Well,
outside of that
yeah,
and I
outside of
said-
that, what would you relive?
Well-
Right, we're doing now.
today.
Yeah, today, I guess so. We get to see our grandkids, and we get to see them at a mature age, and we get to see the good upbringing that they bring out,
Mhm.
that they've had, that their parents have brought them,
Mhm.
and their morals and their quality of life, and the decisions that they've made, and we're proud of them. And wish we could see the ones that they're going to have. We may not be here, but we know that they will instill upon them what our kids have instilled upon them. And it's rewarding to see what your children have become, and you're so proud of them.
Well, I look back. We've got 6 grandkids. So many of our friends have got a kid like Mark Nunn that was raised across the street from. He got in trouble and fired a gun, and he's in prison in Huntsville. And to quote his dad, he said it's probably the best thing happened to him because said they take care of him.
Yeah, he has mental health problems.
Bipolar,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
but I mean, lots of kids, you know.
We're so thankful that God has blessed us
Yeah.
with great children and their
Right.
children's children. And we see how blessed we have been.
Sure.
And it's rewarding to see. And we see friends that we went to school with, and we were so blessed to go to a town like Talpa. It was small, but their good morals and their good teaching was instilled in us. And we were blessed by God to be in an area that we were raised in. And to see the kids that we went to school with, and we remark about how they still have those same values that they grew up in. And it's like, even my friend Patsy, I think, God has blessed me because I moved a lot.
Mhm.
She's the stabling force, the Talpa kids, or the stabling force always went back there. And God was merciful enough to see that I had staunch childhood friends that continue to this day. The 4 girls that we met in 2009 at our house in Round Rock had to get together. They spent the weekend with us. We had a wonderful time singing and going to eat out together, and to remembering and getting around the piano and playing the piano and singing together, and took videos. We still keep our friendship. One's in Fort Worth,
one's Fort Worth, one's in
Carrollton, one's in
Arlington.
Arlington. One's in Arlington, and then Patsy's in Forsyth, and she's going to be here shortly. And we have they've had health problems, and
They've had health problems. One in
Barbara in Fort Worth,
Fort Worth has got
cancer,
cancer,
and
and she's got problems.
the
And
one in Arlington fell and broke her hip and her wrist in 6 places, and she has rheumatoid arthritis, so osteoporosis. So, but even through all that, we all have our faith in God and our love for each other, and we stay in contact. We're in contact almost every week, and God has allowed all of that. What if I'd grown up somewhere I did not have that to draw from, or Joe didn't have his friends to draw from? We see someone almost, the other day at the hospital, we ran into this woman, and she couldn't open the door. She was doing a walker, younger than us. And I said, I'll open the door for you. And when I opened the door, she said, I know you. And I looked at her and I said, Barbara Jones. And she said, yes, she'd been in the hospital. She had complete heart failure. Her heart just quit. She said, I think it's disappointment. It's like when you're grieved from disappointment, there is such a condition. I forget what the name of it is. She's been in the hospital with that. And because due to her husband, some things in his health's deteriorated. But we see people almost every day from our walk in life through all these years.
You knew her from where?
Ballinger. Yeah, and so, yeah, I guess this is a good time in our life.
Yeah.
And our kids come more than they did when we lived in Round Rock even.
I know. I was telling, I think, Katie that I see it all more now that you live here than when you lived
Yeah.
45 minutes away.
And I think part of the reason is you had your families and they had their families, which was you, and you were growing up, and, you know, we were working, and now we're not. And I think this is kind of like home to them,
Sure.
because
It'd be
your
nice
parents
if
were
we
first married here.
was able to just get in the car and, you know, drive to Austin or Dallas, Fort Worth, or wherever, you know.
I wish we lived closer, but the traffic prohibits that. We can't live in the city. We
Yeah.
can't. And this is a better place for us. It makes it more difficult for them to come back and forth, because I know my dad, through the years, I thought it would be so nice if we could be right there. But you just, life circumstances just doesn't allow it. But we're always glad to see them wherever we can. We don't travel that much anymore. Joe really doesn't feel like it.
The doctor, my dentist, asked me one time when I was there, and he said, well, have y'all taken any trips lately? And I said, yeah. I said, a couple of months ago we went over to Ballinger.
Vacation.
Yeah, and my sister lives in Belgium, you know, but she's blind. And she can't go anywhere. She's 24/7, has to have total care. We're close to her, but in a sense, I still have her, and I love her, and I'll go to her for information and just expressing our care for each other. But our lives are not the same in the sense I've lost my sister that was communicative, doing things together. We did a few things after her husband died, after he died, and I took her some places. Joe, with his brother, the last trip you had with Foy, he would not take for that. They went and looked at the Bluebonnets and drove out around Cruise and all the places that they grew up and the places that they used to live and where they were baptized, and they were able to reminisce all of that. And Joe misses him. I miss him. And someday we're going to be there.
That's right. Was there a story that you or Aunt Jo told me once about her moving into a house and they had some dog that wouldn't go upstairs and they thought it was haunted? And
that was when they were in New Jersey.
will you tell the story?
If I can remember it, there were some sconces or something that I don't know if she bought them, if they were in the house that they rented. They'd moved from California to New Jersey with Craig's work. And if it's something she had bought somewhere and put up or whatever, or if they were in the home. But she really thought that they were haunted. And their dogs wouldn't go upstairs. I just remember a little bit of that.
Didn't it?
And I think they got, you probably remember more than I do.
I was thinking something about the pastor came and blessed the house, and as soon as he blessed the house, then the dog would go upstairs.
That's right.
Something like that.
I remember parts of that. Yeah.
Papa Joe, you gotta tell a story about the one you told last night about Jeffrey letting him drive when he was 7.
What do you want me to tell
I don't
again?
like
Yeah.
the story.
You don't
I
like
don't like the
it? Tell it again.
Well, we he'd drive around town there, you know, and of course, I know one time I had to move a tractor from the river place right out of Ballinger to the farming implement to have some work done on it, and he went with me, you know, and couldn't see him. He's too short. And unbeknownst to me, about the time Shirley come in from work. And she proceeded when we got home to chew both of us out for letting him drive, you know. She was going on about what would you have done if I'm in the car. He said, well, you was coming and said I stopped and let you pass.
Well, I can remember when I drove, and I learned to drive on the Garden City Country Road from there to Fort Santa to Big Springs and back. And then when we moved, and I got my license when I was 14, and driving in Ballinger was a whole different ballgame, to where there were people to think about, turning right, other cars, lights, stopping, and all this. And I couldn't comprehend how a child that age could comprehend all that. They're just not there yet.
Sure.
And that's what concerned me about him driving. Well, plus he
But
was
he
too
did.
young.
He was a step ahead of her there because he knew to watch for
Well,
traffic.
he's probably smarter than I was when I was that age. But
And
And so what happened?
no, the time then another time, I was going to move some equipment from the river place to the place at Talpa.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, well, I'll move it on the Saturday morning when the highway patrol won't be out. So we go out to the river place and get things hooked up. I'm on the big tractor with the double cutter and chisel plow behind it. Maybe I had the grain drill. I don't know. We had a regular train. And Jeffrey was behind me in the pickup with an irrigation pipe trailer and a butane trailer. And I don't think we had a stock trailer in that train. But anyway, we was coming back through Ballinger. Well, we'll come by the courthouse there. Just as we passed the courthouse, Ed White's sitting up here waiting. He lived in that part of town. To wait till we get through so he can come across. And of course he saw Jeffrey driving. Well, he didn't stop us, went on. So that evening, we went out and spent the day out doing the farm, doing whatever. And so when we started back to town, I let him drive to Talpa. I'd let him drive to Talpa, and then I'd take over there because that's public road. Anyway, I met him just out of Talpa. He hooked the light on, you know, and pulled me over. He said, Joe said, how old's Jeffrey? And I don't remember how old he was, 6, 7 years old. And I told him, and he said, well, don't you think that's a little young to be driving? And I said, well, yeah, but I said, Ed, I think you'll agree that he's better there than on that big tractor. He said, well, I can't argue that. But he said, it sure makes it hard on me when I pull these kids over here in town, 15, 16-year-old, give them ticket, and said, here, you're letting them drive. So anyway, we passed on, and those then when Steve was trying to get his license, and Ed come to bat for us, and he was a character witness for him, you know.
Tell the story about him jumping on the floorboard.
Oh, yeah. You know, I've always told boys, when you get, if you see you're going to have a car wreck, get in the floorboard, get some protection around you. Because you'd hear somebody always thrown through windshield or something like that. So we was going the road to Talpa, and we looked up, here come a car. I said, Steve, I said, that comes a car. I said, what are you going to do? Well, I thought, you know, he'd say, well, I'll get on my side of the road. He just went, boom, back, hit that floorboard.
Oh, that's funny. Steve-O,
Yes, sir.
any questions?
No, you covered a bunch of them.
Alright.
Doing good.
Well, thank you both.
Yeah, you bet.
Tell about your grandmother that thought she was Indian.